As part of this year's Holiday Make Off, I'm going to show you how to use the molding toolpath in a double-sided job to make a nice looking serving tray like this. When I first started to think about what I would make for this Holiday Make Off, I asked a few questions around the office to see what people remembered about their holiday experiences. And it seemed to be a lot of people gathered around, guess what? Food. So I thought it'd be kind of nice if we could make maybe a cake tray or cake server, or maybe even just a regular little serving tray. And when that came to mind, I remembered that I was away at a trade show a while ago and I saw a nice little book that had a very cool little textured serving tray in it. And I thought I might use that for inspiration. And in order to achieve it without doing any 3D modeling, the best way to do that would be to use the molding toolpath in a two-sided environment. So after I had that idea into my head, I thought, well, let me just sort of sketch this out. And so I'll quickly just do that so you get a good sense of what I would like this to kind of look like. So first of all, it would be an angle like this with a bit of a handle on it, and then the tray, and then the other handle on the other end like this. A space in the center for some texture, and then maybe some text along that as well. And that seemed like that was pretty achievable with the molding toolpath. So I have an instance of vcarve desktop here with a job already set up. And we'll just sort of review that job setup. So it's a double-sided job, like I had talked about. This sort of width and height and thickness is about what I think we're gonna need for a decent size kind of serving tray. And the thickness is about what I think we're gonna need in order to create some decent, useful handles on this. So that's where those numbers came from, again, just out of the top of my head at the moment. When it comes to our zero position, what we're gonna do is, when I do the first side, I'm gonna be zeroing off the top of my material. And then when I flip it over, I'm gonna zero my Z off of my the bed of my machine, or my spoil board. I think for this job that will actually help me out a little bit, but you can set this up as you like depending on how you're going to cut yours. The datum, as we said, the bottom left, we're going to flip bottom to top, which I like to do. It makes it easier for me to remember. I always flip bottom to top unless there's some reason why I can't. So I go with that. Modeling resolution, we won't be creating any 3D content here. It's going to be all based on the molding toolpath. So there won't be any 3D content, but in my case, my computer can handle a very high modeling resolution, so I go ahead and use that anyway, and we'll click OK. So to start off with this, we're going to sort of visualize the edge of our piece of material. So I'm going to draw a rectangle, and I can do that in the 3D view. That's going to stretch across the middle of my job from one side to the other. It's 14 inches, as you see here. I can press tab on my keyboard and change the thickness to be 1.5, and then press enter. So that's the thickness I think the edge of this board is going to be. Now I can use this now to draw the cross section or the edge of my serving tray that I want to do. In this case, I'm just going to draw the top and the bottom profile of the two molding toolpaths I'm going to use to create this. So let's draw a circle to start with. We'll just draw a circle here somewhere. That looks pretty good. We'll close that down, and we're just going to drag it and snap it to the side, and then we'll snap it to the top of our shape here. That looks good. And then we can just draw in a line across here that'll indicate kind of the top of the flat area of my serving tray. Press escape. Now let's go over to we can tile our views, I guess, the best way to do this. And we'll zoom in, and we're going to remove some of the parts of this circle. So in node mode, I'm just kind of hover over these curves here, these arcs. I can just press D and D, and you'll see that now I have the part that I need left over. I'm just going to maximize that so we can see it better. That looks pretty good. And we'll select these two vectors, and we'll right click, and we're going to join those together. We'll just move the endpoint so that way it finishes that up there. And let's go into node mode. Now this is an arc right now. I would like to turn this into a Bezier, because that way I can shape this a bit better. So let's right click on that, and we'll say to Bezier. And I can just grab this one little node, and using my cursor keys I can pull it out a length that I like, and I'd like to have this less of a sharp point at the bottom, so I can just grab that control handle and move it down a bit to somewheres that I think it looks okay. Yeah, that looks all right. Now we'll take this half of my surface of my serving tray, and we'll hold down the Control, Shift, and H. So Control means copy, Shift means across one of our planes, and H is going to be horizontally. So we're going to copy it across the horizontal plane of our job, and you'll see that's what happened here. If I zoom out a bit, you'll see that it's actually the right end. Hold down my Shift key or right click, and we'll say Join, and we'll move our endpoints. And there we have the first bit of our tray. So that looks pretty good. What I'd like to do though is to just make this a little bit more scoopy looking at the end. So let's go into node mode. And if I press H on my keyboard, you'll see I have this line down the middle. So if I select this set of control points and node, and also select this one, I can mirror the movement. So I'm moving the nodes on my left-hand side, and if I do that, you'll see they're mirroring to the right. And there we go. I like that shape much better. That looks great. The next thing I need to do is to create the profile for the bottom of this serving tray. So to do that, I'm going to go to my offset tool. And the way an offset tool works along a single vector is pretend that you're driving your car down the vector. And if I want to offset it towards the left, then what I want to do is choose inward and left. If I want to go up or to the right, then I would choose the other option. I think about, let's make this maybe a little bit more than this. Let's make it 0.5 of an inch. Okay, we'll go inwards, we'll offset that. And that looks okay. You'll see I got sort of a handle going here. Let's undo that. And let's just make sure we get a decent shape. So let's put it back to 3.5 again. And we'll offset that. There we go, that looks a little bit better. Great. Now, what we're going to do is we're actually going to, we'll leave it there where it is. We just need to make sure that, actually, no, we're going to do that. We're going to grab these two vectors and we're going to stretch them. Just for the sake of showing you how this works, I'm going to make it look a little funny, but that's because when we do our molding toolpath, the molding toolpath takes into consideration the topmost point of your vector. So this vector here on the top side, this will actually be at the very top of our material. When we flip it over, this will be at the very top of our material. Now you'll see in my final design that this looks a little bit different, but this is kind of the idea. And the fact that it's a little bit thicker here in the middle, it doesn't matter for this demonstration. This is solely just to show you how this works. So let's close this down and we'll go ahead and select those, and we will move this up here out of the way. That looks great. Now we're going to need a couple drive rails. We need one for this upper vector and one for the bottom vector. The upper vector is really easy. We just need to go ahead and draw in a line from the top to the bottom. Press escape. Now the next one we're going to need to use a guideline for, just to make our life a bit easier. Just go into our pick tool and we'll just grab a guideline. We'll draw another line here and we'll pop it down to there and we'll press escape. And now we have two vectors. So we have two drive rails and two cross sections. Now, make our life a bit easier, I'm going to select this a cross section and that drive rail, and we'll right click. Oh, that's because I'm hovering over top of my guideline. If I right click on the actual vector, then I can move that to the other side so it's not on this side. Now let's go ahead and look at the actual molding toolpath. So let's jump over here. So to use the molding toolpath, first of all, I need to select a drive rail and then also a cross section. If you want to know a little bit more about the molding toolpath, I highly suggest you watch our video on how to use the molding toolpath, where we'll get into all of this stuff really in depth. So if I confuse you a little bit here or you get lost, that's okay, because we've got a great video to support this. So as you can see, that the actual toolpath is going to be at the top of my material, which makes a lot of sense. I'm going to use a ball nose to do my finishing toolpath with. Okay, so it's going to use a nice finishing, that ball nose is going to give a nice finish to the top of this. I'm going to vary my step over, so that way as the molding toolpath goes up and down different curves, it's going to be nice and smooth because it's going to vary that step over. I'm going to skip the flat regions with this ball nose because I'm going to go ahead and use my clearance tool to get rid of that material that's in the flat areas, because it's a flat bit on that, so I can go ahead and use that to do that work with. And you can see I've got machine flat regions here. I'm going to leave a little bit of material behind in the areas that the bull nose is going to get to, so that it has some material to remove, and that's going to be 0.1 of an inch. It's a lot like our finishing toolpath when you do a 3D toolpath. And that all looks great. We're going to use automatic boundary offset. That's going to mean that it's going to extend the vectors out to the left and the right of that cross section just a little bit, whatever it thinks is correct, so that we get right to the bottom of those shapes. And that's all set up perfectly, except for if you take a look in the actual 2D view here, you're going to see that right now we're going to be creating the molding toolpath off the wrong side of this drive rail. So if I right click on that drive rail, I can reverse the direction and it will flip over into my job where it belongs. Now with the molding toolpath, what we're going to do is we're going to run our tool up and down here based on this profile, which is going to give us a really fast toolpath to cut without having to do any 3D modeling. So let's calculate that. And we'll quickly go ahead and preview that. You'll see what we're going to get here. That looks really good. So let's preview that visible model. And you'll see that there we're going in and we're clearing out all that extra material that we don't want, along with cutting that flat area on the top of my tray right down. And you'll see that the finishing or the sweep profile will actually go in and clean up these edges here and give us a nice smooth finish. So that looks really good there. Let's pop over to the other side and let's do exactly the same. We'll go back to our 2D view and we'll select this drive rail, hold down our shift key, and we'll grab this cross section. Like I mentioned before, we're the molding toolpath will take the highest point on this vector and have it at the surface of our material. So that's exactly what I want to have happen here. Close this down. We'll create another molding toolpath. All the settings are going to be exactly the same. Nothing's going to change, and we'll calculate that. Then we can preview that visible toolpath, and we'll have a look at what we get in the end. And that's what we're going to have, which is exactly right. Don't worry about these end bits. We can get rid of those later, but you'll see that the whole theory behind using the molding toolpath on a two-sided part to create a tray does work out exactly as you see it here. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the finished file that I'm going to use to go ahead and cut this serving tray with. Okay, I've gone ahead now and opened up the file, and we're looking at one of the sheets. Now this file contains actually 3 different sheets. So let's just take a second and look at the vectors at the top here, and they're the ones that are going to help me explain how I'm going to make a blank up for this job. Now I looked around the labs and I didn't have a piece of material that I thought was going to be thick enough for this project. So what I decided to do was to use these 2 pieces of material here. So I've got a piece of maple here, and I can use this for the actual tray part of the job. And then I've got this other material, which I'm not quite sure what kind of wood that is. It's quite red looking, but I could use this to make 2 sort of raised handle areas that I could then carve away to shape to make a nice looking tray. So that's sort of what you see at the top here. We've got this bottom rectangle here, which is that piece of maple. And then we have these 2 end bits here that would be the red material sort of pocketed into the maple. I thought that might give it a nice sort of smooth look once I was done kind of shaping it. Now when I was showing this project off to Rebecca to see what she thought, she was a little concerned that maybe just gluing these into the pockets wasn't going to be enough support to hold this together. So using some dowels might be a nice option. So I went down that road and we inserted in some dowels here. What'll be nice about this is as we kind of sort of shape this, as that handle shape comes down, it'll actually shave off the tops of those dowels, and it should look pretty unique. So this first sheet that you're looking at right here shows off the 2 handles and the dowel positions. And I'm going to pocket down this distance right here. So when I go to do that, I just use the measuring tool, and I can go ahead and measure the distance between that point there and this point down there. And it tells me that it's about 0.375 of an inch. So that's how deep I'm going to go down in my pocket. Now, when I'm all done creating this blank, it's going to be important that I measure it, because this may not be accurate to what it actually cuts like on the CNC machine. So once I have those handles cut, I can go ahead now and think about what to do about the actual pockets. So I've got another sheet here. And this sheet shows where the pockets are going to be on the maple piece. And if you look at my tooling over here, see that I got the pockets, and they're going to go down 0.3987, which is a little bit more accurate measurement than what I did there just quickly. And that way I can glue in. Oh, one thing I do want to point out about those pockets is that I used a pocket allowance. That way I can be sure that the handles would fit nicely into those pockets and me not have to hammer them in. Now, I was a little bit unsure of how I was going to glue those in and clamp them in place. So yeah, we'll kind of see how that worked out in the end. So now that I have all that done, what I can do is I can go over and cut that on the CNC machine. Now, full disclosure, because there needed to be a glue up here and there's going to be some wet glue, I've already done this part of the job already. And so let's take a look at how it cut on the CNC machine. Okay, now that you've seen how I've done all of that work, I need to go over today and cut off the tops of those dowels because they're sticking out quite proud from the handle of the material. So I've got this flesh saw. We're just going to go ahead and cut those off right now. Okay, now that those are cut off, I can now get a measurement of the proper thickness of my material that we're going to use on the final sheet in our actual project. So I'm going to use the calipers to do that with, and we're just going to get a rough measurement, something that's pretty close, I hope. Okay, perfect. Got that? Now let's go ahead and look at that file. Okay, now that we know the thickness of that blank, then we can go ahead and modify the final sheet to make sure that the material thickness is correct. So if I go up to my sheets here for a second and show the tray sheet, and we'll zoom out and we'll have a look at that. We're gonna take a look at, close down that toolpath. We're gonna go over to our job setup and we're going to make sure that the thickness of that material for that sheet. So you just saw me click on job setup and that was wrong. I need to actually go to my sheets because this is a sheet issue. I want to make sure that this sheet, not the rest of them, are set up to be this right thickness. So let's go to our tray and we're going to go down to edit. And you'll see that I've already gone ahead and changed that to be 1.2 of an inch thick. So that's perfect, and we can go ahead now and look at the tooling that I'm gonna do for the rest of this job. So let's cancel out of that. Now again, we're gonna take a look at this. You'll see up top, I've left the blank drawing so that I could really be sure what was gonna happen. I've got now this rectangle here in the middle, which is the actual finished size of the tray. Now what I want to do is to design the actual molding toolpath. So here we have it right there, and you'll see that the molding toolpath fits perfectly inside of that blank. And that was my idea in the end, was to draw this to scale with inside this blank. So again, the top of these is going to be at the top of my material, and the bottom of the legs, the top of the legs, will be on the top of the bottom side of my material. And this distance here will be reasonably accurate. Now, because this was drawn up before I actually knew the thickness of my blank, it's not going to be quite as accurate as what it should be, but it should be pretty close. And you'll see we have our drive rails set up for our molding toolpath. So that looks really good. I'm really quite happy with that. The next thing I want to think about is to create a, actually, first of all, let's just preview those toolpaths on this side just to make it look great. So let's reset our preview here and let's preview those visible toolpaths on this side. And that way we'll get an idea of how this is going to look. Now keep in mind that the software doesn't know that I've created this blank, so it's treating it as it's one solid thing, which isn't the case. So we flip over to the other side and we're going to take a look at those two sweep profiles. We'll preview that visible toolpath. When we're all done this, we'll see that we have a tray. Now there's no cutout pass or anything like that yet, but you'll see that we're getting the shape of our actual board here. You know, hopefully what we'll see when we're all done cutting it. So let's go back over to our other side again, and we'll look at the top of our job. And go back to our 2D view just for a second, so we can do this in the 3D view too. We can turn on some of the other layers. We have our text layer. So I'm going to add in some text into my job. So you'll see that my text is going to be along the top and the bottom of my tray. And of course, this is highly customizable text. So yeah, right now I've got this set up for a holiday celebration. That could be Thanksgiving, it could be Christmas, it could be anything. You could also customize this maybe for a wedding, or maybe just for Thanksgiving, maybe with thankful on it, or family or something like that. So, you know, you can think about how you might reuse this file for all kinds of different things. So that's kind of nice. That's really easy. That's just a really simple vcarve toolpath, and we can take a look at that if you'd like to. Oops, rest on it. We'll just preview that visible toolpath, and we have a nice looking V-carving of some text there. Now, the next thing I want to show you how to do is to add in some texture. So I have this texture area that's going to be in the middle of my screen. So that's the actual blue box that's here. Now, if you've never used the texture area toolpath, I really suggest you have a little bit of fun with this. I could have put texture all over this if I wanted to, or at least in the flat areas, because there isn't any 3D model. I can't project it onto a 3D model. This is the molding toolpath after all. But I certainly could have gone ahead and done any of the flat areas, maybe even ran it up a little bit onto the handle, just a little bit to kind of sort of blend it in. But I chose just to do it in this rectangle here. So if I look at my texture area toolpath, it looks pretty daunting, but it's really not in the end. We have a great video on how to use the texture toolpath. One you might want to watch if you want to get a little bit more into this, but it is quite a useful toolpath to create textures with. So first of all, it's going to ask us for what tool we'd like to use. So I'm going to use that 1/4 inch ball nose. I'm not going to use a selected vector pattern, okay? I'm just going to fill this rectangle with sort of a random or a semi-random texture. So I'm going to start off with my cut depth, which is going to be the max. So I'm going to let it go down about 1/8 of an inch, with a little bit of randomness in there too, so it'll kind of vary that distance just a little bit. My cut length is going to be, the maximum cut length is going to be about 2 inches, and again, I'm going to put a little bit of randomness in there, so it ends up varying that just slightly. And the maximum overlap, so that's going to be end to end, so like the chisel marks. So end to end of those chisel marks, how much they're going to overlap, and I said about 10%. And again, we're going to add in a little bit of variation there, a little randomness to that. The step over is the distance between the lines. So just like using your tool when you're thinking about doing like a roughing or a finishing toolpath, what that step over is going to be. So I thought, you know, and again, 1/8 of an inch might be a nice number to go with. And once you generate this, you can rechange these numbers as much as you like to kind of see what happens. Even play around with the size of your tool. Again, I just used that 1/4 inch ball nose, but if you had a big bowl cutter, then you could come up with some really great sort of aggressive looking carving in the bottom of this or on the surface of this tray. That all looks great. We're not going to bother with any boundary. I've kind of designed that into my project, but if I did want to leave a little bit of a gap, I could, but we're not going to worry about that. And we can just calculate that. And you'll see that there is my texture toolpath. Now, couple things you want to keep in mind is that because I'm doing it at the base of this, and I didn't point this out, but I have the actual start depth. So I knew how deep this was based on my vector that I created, because we know about the molding toolpath again. So all I need to do is just measure from the top of this handle to the top of this sort of vector here, and that would be my start depth. That was important, but keeping in mind that when I make these moves at the end of each of the sort of scoopy moves, we're going to end up having to go up to our safe height that we have set. So there is going to be a little bit of Z travel in here that you can't really control. So just keep that in mind. So let's close that down, and we can preview that selected toolpath, and we'll take a look at that, and we'll see what we're going to end up with in the end. Yeah, that looks really quite nice. I think that's going to look good once we're all done. So we've got the V-carving in there, and we're going to look at our cutout toolpath next. Now you notice I'm not going through these in order. That's because this is the kind of the way that I sort of felt that I designed this. So, and the last thing I would do is worry about how to flip this. So right now we're going to look at our cutout toolpath. So I'm going to preview that, and you'll see what it does. It's actually going to cut just down halfway through my material, and because I can see the other side, you can kind of see that it's going to poke through the other side when I'm all done. But I think that's as far as I want to go down, because I want to add in some tabs here to make sure that it holds itself in place. I am a little bit worried about when I flip this over, because I'm only going to have the top of these ridges and the top of my material that I have left from those handles to kind of make it flat. So I'll have to think about that once I get to the machine. But anyway, that was sort of what I was thinking, that if I cut the final cutout pass on the back side, and that's where my tabs lived, things will be a little bit more tight. So anyway, that looks really good. Now we're also going to need to use those dowel locations, right? Because we're going to do an asymmetrical dowel flip. Now, Rebecca and I have shown you this several times. There's lots of videos about how to do that. So if you're really interested in that, take a look at our videos that we have. And I believe that Rebecca's holiday project, she goes into super in-depth on how to do a flip job. So you might want to, if you haven't seen it, you might want to watch it to get a little bit more information on that. But we're going to go ahead and preview those dowel holes there. Now, I do have this last toolpath here that I don't really necessarily want you to run, and you're not going to run it ever because it'll actually cut out those dowels that you've put into place. But what this will do is it will illustrate where those dowels are going to be on my the dowels that are holding those handles in place on my my finished project, and they'll fit just nicely inside of the beginning of that scoop, which should give me a little bit more support once those are glued in there to hold those handles on there. So yeah, that looks really good. Now let's just go ahead and have a peek at the other side. We have the spoil board dowel holes. So those are the ones I'm going to take my material off, or my blank off the machine, and I'm going to cut these right in to the spoil board, and then I'm going to put my dowels in there, put my material back on top again, and then start to cut my backside toolpaths. But because when I set up my job, remember I said I'm going to zero my material when I flip it over off the material bed. Be sure that you set a start depth that's equal to your material thickness, okay? That way the tool will go up, over, and through your invisible material that you have there, because it won't be on your table, and then actually start to cut down that 0.35 an inch when it gets to the top of your spoil board. We don't need to preview that toolpath because it won't show anything different that we already have. We got the two sweep profiles that we looked at, and then this is the last cutout toolpath. You can see that I've got some tabs in there. So if we preview that visible toolpath, or preview that selected toolpath, you'll see it's going to cut down through. I got to select the toolpath, don't I? Preview that one, and you'll see it'll cut down through, and there we have the finished job. Now that looks pretty nice, I think. I love the way that it kind of turned out in the preview here. Now it all comes down to how I go about doing it on the CNC machine. So let's go over there right now and cut those toolpaths. So that's the first side done. Now we need to think about the second side. Now I knew this was going to be a potential issue, is that when I flip it over, there's really nothing to support this side at all, except for these little legs right here. So what I've decided to do was to cut these little blanks here out of some plywood we had kicking around, which happens to be, just by fluke, the exact depth. So I can use that actually to help support this piece of material. Now I'm not going to worry about the center. I'm going to leave it just as it is. I'm happy with that. Now the next thing I need to think about is, because I'll be zeroing my tool off the machine bed this time around, I need to make sure that in my tool path I set my start depth for my tool path that I'm going to use to cut the dowel holes into my spoil board at a start depth of the material thickness, which in this case is 1.2 inches. That way we'll actually, because this won't be in the way, it's going to think the material's there, it's not going to be there. So we need to actually cut through that air where this material is supposed to be. So we're going to go ahead now and cut those dowel holes, then go ahead and screw this down, and we'll start running those new tool paths. as always, I'm pretty happy with the way that turned out, especially when I only get a chance to make one of them. I think it looks really good. I think one thing I might change if I was going to do it again, maybe two things I would change. One is I would try and source thicker material. I think that would have done a little more justice to its shape. And also I'd find a better way to clamp my handles in place. You could experiment with this project, and you actually could do it and cut the handles separately and put them back on in the end, and that might give you a little bit more sort of depth to work with. Like I said, you can customize this to be whatever you'd like it to be. So as a holiday or a birthday or an anniversary or whatever kind of gift, I think it's right up there, and you can customize it as much as you'd like. Yeah, so I hope you liked that video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't followed our channel, please do. If you have any comments, please leave them below, and I'll do my best to answer those. And from me to you, I hope you have a really great holidays, and I can't wait to see you next year. See you then.